So look, thank you everybody for joining in to this afternoon's webinar session. I guess just by way of introductions, because with the way we've got our webinar set up, we both look like Guru Learning. But this afternoon, it'll be myself, Stuart Canning, and Josh Humphreys, our CEO and co-founder, taking us through the content this afternoon. So we'll kind of work our way through. Now, as we go, if you do have any questions that sort of come up with the content that we're running through, please do feel free to put those into the chat and we'll do our best to address them in real time if we can. But in the worst case scenario, we have earmarked some time towards the end of today's session to run through some Q&A for anything specific that we couldn't cover sort of in the flow of the webinar itself. So I guess lovely to meet you all. And with that in mind, let's just have a quick recap of what we're going to be covering off from an agenda perspective today. So obviously, as you all saw in accepting today's invitation, the focus for today is around winning government tenders and growing the recurring revenue opportunity as a result of that. So the way we're going to section up today's webinar is to focus really with an initial sort of expose on the current government learning landscape and I guess our observations in the recent opportunities that we've seen presented to the marketplace sort of in the past sort of 12 to 18 months in particular. And as an extension of that, sort of an understanding of what we're seeing in terms of trends for government buyers. So what are the things that they're particularly wanting? What are the types of opportunities that are being presented as, I guess, contract opportunities and revenue opportunities for us sort of as suppliers into this industry sector? Then looking at what we can do from a differentiators perspective and how are the ways that we can, I guess, from a strategic point of view, construct the bid process and also the solutions to maximize our, I guess, success potential and ability to win those government contracts that we're seeing come out with increasing frequency. We're going to focus a little bit, I guess, on the product side in terms of, I guess, our ability through our Guru Academy platform to implement some of those policy to practice capabilities. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that today. And then finally, Josh will take us through, I guess, some principles of effective partnering between Guru and our partner ecosystem. And then also spending a fair amount of time on actually constructing government bids from a pricing and recurring revenue perspective. Then I guess as a final, I guess, event for the day, we'll be announcing our partner program that we've been, I guess, working on for the past 6 months in particular. So we're definitely excited to lift the covers off that and I guess give you an initial insight into what that is and how that'll help you succeed in this area as well. And then, as I said, if we need it to fall back, we'll have Q&A there ready to go towards the end. So starting at the very top of the agenda, I guess what we wanted to start with is a bit of a macro viewpoint of the government learning landscape right now, and particularly sort of what we've seen, as I said, in the past 12 to 18 months. And we've kind of bucketed that into, I guess, a few key categories of, I guess, elements that we're seeing presented throughout the marketplace and the opportunities that we're seeing. So starting on the left, we definitely see a theme of digital transformation coming through quite strongly with a lot of the tender bids and tender opportunities that we see announced to the marketplace. So we see frequently and with increasing frequency that digital learning solutions are becoming, I guess, a vehicle for policy implementation. So whether that's training at scale out into the marketplace or whether that's delivering on a specific industry initiative or a specific policy stance, we are seeing increasing numbers of opportunities that are shaped in that direction. But then I guess looking, I guess, more at the government ecosystem itself, we've still got that shift towards, I guess, skill-based workforce planning. So around what are the digital skills, what are, I guess, the more future-focused skills that government employees are going to need in order to be successful sort of in their role and within the broader government department or agency that they represent. And I think as an extension of that, there's also, I guess, increasing coverage in a lot of the ATM documents and tender requests that we see where there is that demand for, I guess, evidence-based capability development. So how can we show the proof points around how those skills are being formed and how those skills are being refined as a result of the educational programs that their participants are engaging with? And that kind of segues us into the middle here, where we talk about some of the key pain points and perhaps some of the underlying reasons why people are looking for an outsourced solution in these tender opportunities. And that is obviously from a project timeline point of view, very frequently they are on fairly tight timelines. We see that often an extension of time is required in terms of the actual closing process and awarding of the contract. And then we usually see as an extension of that, the project timelines themselves get condensed even further. So we do see that there are those timeline constraints almost from inception in a lot of these projects. So I think, again, that's something where if we can add value around minimizing and I guess mitigating to some degree those pain points, again, that puts us in a stronger position. Definitely budget constraints and demonstration of ROI sort of growing on the final point of digital transformation, is a big factor. We see pricing is always going to be a component of any tender opportunity. But we are seeing, I guess, that ROI presentation being one that's popping up with increasing frequency. And then I guess we have, I guess, the existing pain points, and I would sort of segue this as challenges as well, that there's always going to be the security and compliance requirements where there may be mandates around what technology stack we may need to use, or I guess the means in which we can produce the resources, be that from a format perspective or from a process perspective or both. And with many government departments, as I'm sure most people on this call will be fully aware, is there's often the legacy system challenge around we need to integrate with their existing infrastructure. And depending on the agency or department, that can be a small issue or that can be quite a large one. So that's definitely something that we see as a continuous pain point. And that's not perhaps something that's particularly shifted in the past 12 to 18 months, but it's just a clear reality of engaging in that government sector. So what we see, I guess, is the more emerging learning priorities, the ones that we're starting to see with more frequency, particularly in the past year, is around that policy implementation. And I think at scale is the key part of that equation. Around we're seeing a lot of large volume opportunities starting to come through, where there's been, I guess, particular directive coming from the government or a particular scheme or a particular policy that needs to be executed upon, and they're looking for training as a means to help do that. We're also seeing a lot of the agencies, and even sort of at a broad sort of federal level, there are capability frameworks in place, and I guess execution on those is becoming more apparent insofar as people wanting to build skills in particular categories and rolling that up sort of amongst the levels of staff, depending on the systems that they're using, across their individual agency or department. And we are seeing themes very strongly around, I guess, provoking and encouraging that cross-agency collaboration and also, I guess, that customer service focus for their staff. So I think we're seeing a lot more opportunities that are starting to lens that way. And then ultimately, I kind of capstone that underneath with sort of a point that runs through all three of these, which is around, I guess, that evidence and I guess the transparent learning outcome measurement is what, with increasing frequency, we're actually seeing called out in these tender documents and requests. So kind of segueing, I guess, from a macro level down to, I guess, a bit more of the operational level around, well, who are our government buyers? Like, who are the people that we're engaging with in order to firstly win the business, but then ultimately deliver on that business when successful? So I kind of bucketed the stakeholders into a few categories here, which is around very often we might be dealing with an individual agency. So we're going to be dealing with either a procurement team or a project committee that's been spun up as a result of that opportunity. So there's often, and in 99% of the cases, going to be, I guess, mixed priorities within that team, but also, I guess, a dedicated focus within that team because they are representing either that single agency or single project within that agency. Then I guess the next level is more at that department level. So we think more of the skills and capability frameworks and I guess execution on individual development of their own staff at that point. And again, their purchasing needs are often related to either a specific requirement in terms of skill uplift or a specific scenario that they're trying to mitigate. Perhaps they have a deficiency in a particular skill area, or there's a service that they want to be able to offer in a more compelling way, or perhaps a new service that they need to offer, or a new technology coming into their department that's going to affect, I guess, their current staff capability to do their day-to-day job. So again, we usually find that there would be a specific need or scenario that needs to be addressed there, or it may be multiple of those depending on the opportunity. But that's more, I guess, at a department level rather than necessarily nested within an entire sort of individual project. Then with any of these projects, we're always going to have the IT consideration. And I guess I can summarize that very quickly in a single line here. They just want the least amount of pain possible. So how can I get a compelling solution that's going to be frictionless, that's going to tick all the boxes from a security and compliance point of view, and ultimately not require a whole lot of additional work for them to either integrate into their environment or not, depending on the nature of the project. And then ultimately with our executive sponsors, which is where decisions are going to get endorsed, we just need to ensure that the value is very apparent there and that we have that evidence of ROI that they're signing off on in order to award that contract in a positive way to our bid. So if we look around, I guess, the decision-making timelines or cycles rather, and the budget consideration sort of within that timeline of awarding the tender, We are seeing, I guess, with increasing frequency, more funding approaches and more different models when it comes to, I guess, funding. So you still will always have, I guess, the project-based funding for individual things that they're looking to deliver on, but we are starting to see more and more either annualized or multi-year agreements that are being part of those tender opportunities. And again, I think this provides opportunity for us to obviously scale up value over time, but also design our revenue models to help complement that style of engagement as well. And then, as with always, we're going to have those granted special initiatives type of funding models. So if we think about the value drivers there that kind of will speak to each of those stakeholders and I guess complement those decision-making cycles, ultimately I kind of broke it down into these four key points, which is around if we can show, I guess, ability to create a frictionless rollout, if we can demonstrate the capability improvement, if we can align to obviously any compliance or reporting requirements that they might have, and we can demonstrate the service level improvements in the nest of whatever type of project that may be. I think these are some of the key value drivers that we can really laser in on and I guess focus on in the way we're both preparing our bid, but also constructing the project deliverables from a solution point of view, but also the revenue model to support the opportunity as well. So if we break that down to if these are some of the things that we're seeing, like what is it that government buyers really want? And I think these are probably not exclusive to government, but I think they particularly resonate in what we've seen in government opportunities. And I think first and foremost is they want that centralized communication. You know, they want that central source of truth and accountability during all stages of the process. So we see very often that even when there are contractors, subcontractors, or supporting partners involved, we always need that central source of truth. So from a partnership perspective, knowing that upfront and ensuring that we have that covered off is of critical importance. And I think that's one of the boxes that we absolutely need to tick in order to be successful in this area. Now, from a policy execution standpoint, if we have projects that are, I guess, fitting into that sort of broad category of we have an education program supporting the rollout of a policy or an update of a policy, ultimately this comes down to low friction, low risk. So how can we help them obviously roll that out at scale with the least possible pain and I guess the maximum possible efficiency? So again, focusing in on how we're going to mitigate the risk side of that equation, and I guess focus on maximizing the community engagement side of that equation. Those are the things that are going to help us really, I guess, get to the nub of what the government buyer wants in that scenario. If it's skill or service level uplift that they're looking for, often measurable outcomes is the thing we can really laser in on. So how can we provide, I guess, that tangible evidence or that evidence in the workplace of how we've connected the education or the training experience through to, I guess, a project reality or a day-to-day reality of what that individual is doing in their day-to-day operation. So how can we try and shorten that path from, I guess, education through to practice? How do we keep that as tight as we can, and how do we make one inform the other, I guess, in a positive way? So from an IT and compliance perspective, ultimately here it's around security and integration. So this is, I guess, de-risk is the theme here. So how can we raise those confidence levels during the procurement process about not only our tech setup, but also around the implementation? Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right team? Do we have the right people in place in order to help with that implementation? Make that cycle as short as it can be, but also make sure we are doing it, I guess, from a de-risk perspective and also from a compliant perspective to make sure that the technology that we're putting in place has people authenticating in the right way. Do they need to be using, I guess, government user IDs or multi-factor authentication? Do we need single sign-on authentication? All those sorts of things are things that we need to make sure that one, we're aware of, but two, we're also equipped to solve when it comes to execution on the project. And then ultimately, again, like we had before, we're going to have the executive oversight, which is where we need those clear value narratives. And I think that's going to be a combination of elements, both specific to the project or the opportunity, but also making sure we're servicing each of those elements out in a way that an executive can be looking at in their executive summary and saying, yes, I've got a high level of confidence that this particular bid or this particular opportunity is the right one. Segueing away, I guess, from the needs a little bit is we're starting to see, I guess, some very distinct trends in the types of opportunities that we're seeing, but also around, I guess, what's the underlying driving force behind those opportunities. So if we think about it, we have and probably always will continue to see things like leadership programs for government's workers. Very often there will be, I guess, a management framework and a staff level framework within all of those government bodies and departments. So they're always looking actively around how can they upskill these people for internal promotion capability, but also around like how do they maximize that leadership skill at each of those levels and tiers within the government organization. So teams like leadership impact, customer service, stakeholder engagement, all the things that you see here are ones that I think we have always seen, at least from my perspective, for the past decade or two. But definitely are ones that I would expect are going to be continued into the future as well, because these are kind of the core, I guess, personal traits and obviously, people management skills that people will need in order to be effective in that environment. The one in the middle here, industry education, is one that we're starting to see more often. If we refer back to what we had up high, where it might be either a government sponsored or a government commissioned education program that's aimed at a very specific industry sector or aimed at a very specific topic. So it might be raising awareness on something, it might be re-educating either the general public or a specific group of, I guess, a sector or a subsector of people. But we are starting to see, I guess, open industry education being government endorsed and even government provided with increasing frequency. As an extension of that, obviously, where we have particular policies or schemes, then definitely that comes down to an element of the execution on that policy stance. And that may be from an raising and awareness perspective, it may be from an upskilling perspective, and it may even be both in some cases. So it's around understanding what training to support those policy mandates is required and how can we best deliver that at scale to the available audience. And then ultimately, kind of bringing it back to one of the themes that we always see is we still see with some frequency government agencies wanting support with digital learning and I guess multimedia design in particular. So that's where again they have limited bandwidth internally. So this is more around how do we outsource bandwidth and I guess contract that to people that have the right skill set, the right subject matter expertise, the right design expertise, whatever that may be, to help support their internal project that they may not have the bandwidth to either deliver on time, or they may not necessarily have that skill in-house to be able to deliver it upon it effectively. So it's around trying to find that balance of in-source versus outsourced development. And that's very often the challenge with this style of opportunity is it may be partially in-sourced and partially outsourced. So it's around how do we complement those things and make sure we're either co-designing together in the right way or operating independently in the right way, or some mix of the two. But kind of drawing a line under all of those things, I was thinking about how do we surface some of those key differentiators that can really help us be successful with these government contracts. And again, kind of broadly dividing this into two categories. And the first one being sort of subject matter consulting and learning design support. And then the second being, as you can see, online education and platform technology. So if we start with the former, it's really around like how do we provide access for government into industry leading subject matter experts? A university tertiary sector has, I guess, great representation. We're very well regarded on a global scale. So we have a lot of subject matter expertise within our university system around how do we put them in front of these government buyers in a compelling way to allow them to really bring their expertise to the table and put that into a government context. So it's around how do we blend that best in breed subject matter expertise from, I guess, the academic side of the equation into that government context and that government reality of day to day. And some of the things in terms of enablers for that are around, well, how do we design that learning experience? How do we get, I guess, the download of that subject expertise from that individual or group of people and convert that into a training experience that's going to build that at a practical and skill level for the government participants? How do we consider things like assessment and diagnostics to help demonstrate impact? So it's not just about necessarily evidence that someone has completed the experience, but have we raised their confidence levels? Have we raised their ability to actually demonstrate that on the job? Have we created projects that allow them to bring perhaps their work context into the learning experience so they can be building skill against something that they're already mandated to deliver on? So how do we try and make that dual purpose in terms of integrating that working into the learning? And I guess all of those kind of come down to, well, in order to roll any effective program like that out, we're going to need, I guess, that implementation and change management process. And that's often a team sport between, you're going to have a learning designer, you're going to have a project manager, you're going to have a subject matter expert, and you're going to have a team of people supporting all three of those key roles. So it's around how do we make that implementation and change management process as effective as it can be. And kind of all that gets capstoned by excellence in delivery. So it's an expectation that these solutions that we're putting in are going to be effective. They're going to be easy to use and people are going to take from it what they need. So we need to make sure that we're ticking all those key boxes. Now, how do we do that? I guess from an online perspective, both from an education, but also from a technology platform perspective. Well, we think about sort of some of the key differentiators we can offer there. There are other things that are expected of us in terms of security and compliance, but what are the things that we could offer as value adds, to help be a differentiator to win that contract? So Can we potentially offer them access to a catalog of learning materials that might not necessarily be available to the general public? So perhaps these are things that people would have to purchase if they wanted to do under their own volition. So around this is something, I guess, as a university partner, we could be bringing to the table to say, well, we've got this huge curriculum or this huge catalog of courses that we can potentially offer people that have a professional development focus. How do we offer that as a value add? So on platform, people can potentially start to opt into additional learning experiences that they're interested in on a personal level. And perhaps then that can also provoke discussions with their leaders within the department or agency to say, actually, I was completing this training experience and I saw this and this that looked interesting. Can I make that part of my own professional development? And it gives us that opportunity to kind of not only, I guess, upsell and cross-sell, which is obviously valuable, for us as providers, but looking at how obviously we can get people leaning into their education more and thinking more about, well, where could I take this beyond just what I'm mandated to do? And I guess one means we could think about that is around, well, how do we potentially offer or advertise or curate development pathways that extend beyond that initial training experience? So yes, we can do all the things that you're asking us to do in this opportunity, but if perhaps it's a capability uplift or upskilling type project, how do we potentially offer them a line of sight to something that extends beyond their core capability framework or builds upon it or adds layers to it? So if people wanted to specialize in a particular area, we give them that ability to go a bit deeper on individual topics or individual subjects. And then I think all of the things that underpin that in terms of key differentiators, I think being able to, I guess, have a confident stance around our compliance capabilities is very important. It's one thing just to tick the box and say, yes, we can be. It's quite a different thing to be showing evidence that we're going above and beyond in terms of ISO certification or onshore hosting, for example. They're kind of two differentiators that can really obviously help, one, make sure that it's a big tick in the box, but also with the stories that can be provided there around not only the fact that it is perhaps hosted onshore, but the infrastructure we have to support uptime or support optimal performance and those sorts of things, and the way we can help build the differentiator around the technology solution there. And then finally, things like single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. Again, these are things that might not be stated as a requirement in the opportunity, but again, opening that door and opening that conversation to say that we can extend solutions into that space, again, can add additional value for the government buyer to help get an opportunity over the line. So I've talked a lot, I guess, in principle about different themes and around the market. So I thought it would be great to actually look at a recent case study of a lot of these things in practice. So a recent example, I guess, of a government engagement that was highly successful was with the Monash School of Clinical Sciences at Monash Health. They partnered with ourselves, Guru, and were awarded the contract to design the program for the Australian DOHA for the chronic wound care consumable scheme. Now, I guess the context for this scheme is that there was, I guess, a budget move from the Australian government in the 23-24 budget cycle that, I guess, allocated additional funds through Medicare to basically make, I guess, chronic wound care more available to people, particularly those suffering diabetes and in that primary healthcare setting. So they wanted to basically develop a chronic wound care consumable scheme to allow people to get access to, I guess, subsidized resources to help with chronic wound management. And one of the elements of rolling out this project was around how do we educate people on best practices in chronic wound care management, but then as an extension of that, also how do we educate people on how to get into this platform and actually procure goods on this scheme as a primary healthcare provider. So if we look at it first at a high level around what was actually requested, so as part of this training package, what they were looking for was, I guess, the ability for the respondent to develop, host, and maintain a standalone instance to support this training solution. So this is where, I guess, extending the current environment within Monash University into a dedicated portal for this opportunity became critical. So we needed to give it its own space, its own branding, its own look and feel, and more importantly, its own user management and ability to report directly to DOHA on the successes of the training program. So what they were really looking for was that technical expertise to ensure that frictionless access. So they're going to have a wide range of stakeholders coming from different domains across the country that are going to need to access this resource and, I guess, importantly, also access it from a variety of devices. So we're potentially going to have people all the way from their mobile phone right up to a desktop device getting engaged with this program to actually, firstly, I guess, learn, I guess, the best principles of chronic wound management, but then also around how do I get access to the subsidy and all of the materials I need in order to manage that within my practice. So two of the key things that they really wanted to see was obviously understanding of chronic wound management, and that's where I guess the team at Monash definitely shines in terms of being experts in their fields and leaders in that space. So obviously that was of huge value to Doha when awarding the contract, and then ultimately again leaning on Monash's expertise around profession-specific training because one of the key elements of this was actually building specific tracks within this learning experience to address things like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health practitioners, medical practitioners and GPs, nurses, both registered and employed, and podiatrists as well. So whilst there were some similarities in terms of how each of those professions would engage, there was also quite a lot of specifics around each of those domains and those professions or subcategories of the profession. So it was critically important to have that subject matter expertise and obviously the solution to support, I guess, branching that in a compelling way. So if we break that down to, I guess, what the core needs were, ultimately, what they needed was a seamless solution. It was a fairly tight timeline to get the program up and running. So obviously they need to execute on the policy-driven stance because there was obviously some substantial funding there, as you can see, that was dedicated across a 5-year program duration for the chronic care wound scheme. So having the training program up and I guess enabling people to engage with the consumable scheme in a compelling way was of critical importance. So if we look at kind of the key things that we need there, obviously the subject matter expertise and professional education expertise first and foremost. They wanted the confidence that we have the right people in the room in order to be able to train these primary healthcare practitioners in a compelling way, but then also looking at the technology and user experience design. So do we have a robust infrastructure that can handle this scale of deployment? And then also from a user experience design, how do we get people in as seamlessly as they can so they know what they need to do, can enroll into the program or be enrolled into the program, which I'll cover in a second, and engage with what they need to engage with. So on the left-hand side here, oh, sorry, on the right-hand side here is where you see just a few screenshots from the experience itself. So some of the ways that we're looking from a user experience point of view to maximize the solution is very often people are going to be enrolling themselves into this program, but also in a healthcare setting, very often they're going to be enrolling someone else into the program. So we may have a person within the practice or within the department actually enrolling a colleague or a staff member, or it may be that at a department level we're wanting to enroll people into a program. So we need to think about obviously in different enrollment flows in terms of not just self-enrollment, but also around ability to enroll someone else. Then from there, the activities that you see on the screen, we wanted to keep the main thing the main thing. So it's nice and clearly signposted around what you need to be doing and when. And there is that division in the learning experience from the chronic wound care management element of it down to how to use the procurement and ordering system to actually order the materials. So there is that 2-module approach to have that distinct focus in each areas. So if we unpack that into how we were successful there, ultimately it was pairing Monash University's reputation and obviously subject and education expertise with our technology and user experience design strength. So if we look at, I guess, both bringing, I guess, the best of both organizations to the table, that's really where we felt the success came from. And obviously with all of this, we needed to create a standalone, dedicated and fit for purpose environment. And I think we conveyed that really well. So if we think about it from a scalable license perspective, because that's one of the important factors here being that it's rolling out over 5 years, is we needed to provide that opportunity for them obviously to grow this because there's quite a large potential addressable audience when you consider the roles in scope here. And if we look at obviously the current success, this has only been live for a bit over 3 months now, if my maths is correct. And we're already north of 5,500 active users within that first 3 months. So again, this shows us just the potential scale available through these government opportunities and particularly these policy implementation processes. So if we unpack that a little bit in terms of, I guess, the technology's ability to take that policy into practice, here we've got, I guess, an example of how we have the policy statement, we've got the practice in terms of the learning experience, and we've got the technology trying to act as the bridge between the two. So ultimately, if we think about our learning design choices and I guess the design principles of us engaging with the Monash team and kind of surface what are the things that we need to include in this style of solution, I think that same methodology can be applied to many different solutions. So ultimately, it's around how do we take, I guess, that policy and actually map that through to practice from a learning design perspective. So how do we create those application scenarios and how do we make sure that's informed by different elements of the policy? How do we actually measure that policy understanding? So assessment isn't just about providing a score or an outcome, but it's around how do we measure that level of understanding or confidence as people are moving through. And then also, although we didn't implement this feature here, there is things like how do we perhaps integrate a manager or a coach into that learning process? So particularly if we're talking about workplace application and on the job projects, how do we actually make that individual or the participants manage a part of that process? One, to create insight into what they're doing. So if I, Stuart, am enrolled in something, I may want to include Josh as my manager and say, Josh, hey, that has a role to play, or at least he is aware of what I need to do as part of my learning process. So again, that can inform, say, professional development discussions or just ongoing meeting cadences and just add that layer of value. So first and foremost, I guess if we're talking about distinct government opportunities like this, the primary requirement for the chronic wound care scheme, and I guess the primary requirement that we're starting to see very often, in a lot of these opportunities, is a dedicated environment to support it. And we think we're really seeing, I guess, two primary styles of opportunities coming through. One is that upskilling academy, which is where you've got many courses, but delivered to either a smaller or a department-based audience. And I guess the flip side of that is where you're going to have frontline industry initiatives, which is, I guess, pointing a training solution to a larger audience, which is where our chronic wound care scheme opportunity falls. So if we think about why you would use a dedicated learning portal to support these sort of things, the points kind of speak for themselves in that it'll allow you to basically bid on those larger scale opportunities because you have the technology layer to support that. Obviously, with a larger audience, you've got more opportunity to build in recurring revenue over time. So it's not just a one and done project. You have the potential to expand this out over multiple years, and many of these opportunities that are frontline industry initiatives will organically span multiple years. If we look at high scale access, obviously to frontline, very often we're seeing that come through in healthcare and education. They're kind of two of the primary sectors that we see that surfacing through the most. There are others, of course, but where we're seeing, I guess, that frontline workforce education or policy implementation, very often health and education are the drivers behind that. So if we look at around how the technology can support, it's around, I guess, automating those operations. So how can we decrease, I guess, on that total cost of ownership for one, but also the operating costs. So around how can we provide the right level of access, I guess, to you potentially if you're the partner providing the solution, but also to the end customer around how can they get insight in an active way into what their participants are doing. So if we think about it, I guess in that context, it might be that we're creating that sandbox environment for your client, not just to meet the tech requirements, but also around like how to provide specific branding for that opportunity. And obviously there may also be opportunities where there's data privacy needs to keep that sort of, behind the iron curtain, so to speak, in terms of keeping that audience segregated. And then that kind of flows into, I guess, the work integrated development. So within, I guess, those dedicated portals, it's around how do we make those portals sticky inside, I guess, the client environment. So I touched on some of these just a few slides ago, but obviously things like ongoing action learning projects that span the entire duration of the course can be highly valuable. So again, it's not just something that you'll do in isolation, but it's perhaps something that you're going to build upon sort of as you increase either your depth of skill or your breadth of skill over time. Again, integrating a manager or coach as part of the learning process, either in an observatory or an active capacity, looking at how you can encourage those reflection-based tasks. So you're getting that feedback submitted into the learning experience from staff. And again, you can be using that as an evidence point to justify the ROI. You're seeing that people are responding positively. You're seeing that they're logging their growth and reflecting on what they've just learned. That can be a really great evidence point to put in front of people. And then ultimately, a feature we can also lean into is things like a participant portfolio where they are building key inputs within their learning experience over time that can then be taken either as a practical resource to help aid with application or even just to act as sort of a reminder to support that behavior change over time. So there's many different ways that we can think about it from a design and user experience perspective to make sure we're leveraging the technology features to the best of our abilities. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Josh and he'll talk to us a little bit about effective principles of partnering.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart, and thanks for that overview. Apologies, you probably see me going on and off camera. I have a bit of a cold at the moment, so if I disappear for 30 seconds, I'm probably coughing. Yeah, so obviously what Stuart's referred to is I guess the benefits of bringing together technology, subject matter expertise, education expertise, learning design, and even delivery and production capability to deliver on a lot of these government opportunities. And it does take a combination of different skills in order to meet the requirements of what government is usually seeking. They're wanting to outsource their problem, so they don't want to have to do too much work. They want to make sure that it's low risk and that it's going to be delivered upon. And no single organization usually has the capability to be able to do that by themselves. Even you see amongst the big consulting companies, often having to partner with other organizations in order to deliver on what these programs require. Particularly when look at ones like the critical wound care one that Stuart mentioned, where you're talking about having to scale to a large audience using digital technology. In that particular case, obviously, they were looking for both subject matter expertise, production capability, as well as the ability to deliver on the project, both from a technology and ongoing perspective, but also in terms of project management. And that means you have to bring together different partners. And to do that successfully, you need to make sure that you all sort of understand what each other's value and where you're going to contribute. Typically, there's a lot of overlap between partners because any partner will be working independently in the market as well. So they'll have a set of capability that another organization might have. So, for example, we are obviously experts in learning design, but so are a lot of our education partners as well. And so it's important to have an upfront conversation about, in this particular opportunity, what are the areas that each partner is going to focus on, and be okay to step back if one of those areas is going to be where one of the other partners is going to focus on. I think the other big important thing to focus on when you're partnering is how you integrate your and come across as a whole unit to the customer, and how you come across aligned, and so it doesn't feel like government doesn't want to feel like they're working with three or four different organizations. They want to feel like they're working with one organization. So it might not necessarily have to be a joint venture, but you have to behave like you are, like you're all aligned. You get together before a meeting with the government sponsor and come across as a combined unit. That often results in having to compromise, or maybe put together your different methodologies and approaches, and kind of come up with something that is best of breed across your different organizations. And it might mean sacrificing a little bit of your way of doing things to come up with something that is a hybrid of the different ways that the different partners work together. And I guess the other thing is making sure that as a partner, the government doesn't want there to be any risk. They want to make sure there's compliance, and making sure you're all aligned on all of the contractual arrangements, the insurance, the security stuff, and make sure you've got all that sorted before you put your bid in. Because at the end of the day, once you win, it's actually too late. They've kind of awarded it to you, and you need to make sure all your ducks in a row. From a partnering perspective, make sure all of your insurances are aligned together, and that you've done each other's security checks, etc. Next slide, Stuart. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we price when partnering, or some tips about how you price and work together. But before we jump into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about value and trying to understand, before you get into pricing, what is it that the government organization that you're pitching to is actually looking for? And it's important to read through the tender and start to understand, what is the thing, that the problem that you're taking away from them. And it's often a number of different things, but it typically falls into these different areas. Sometimes they're going to want your brand reputation because it looks good in the market to be working with particular organizations. So in the previous example that we gave, obviously you may have noticed on the certificate, Monash's brand was on it. So in some cases, government will want you to completely disappear behind the scenes and not the world not to know that you're the person delivering it. In other cases, they're actually looking for that brand reputation from the providers. And typically, when working with education providers, that is definitely the case because they're wanting to be associated with that brand. Methodology is another area. So sometimes they'll come to you, laid out what they want, and you don't really have any influence over it. In other cases, they'll have a bit of a blank sheet of paper, and they'll let you approach the problem with your particular expertise and approach of doing things. That could be things from learning, your learning design experience, or your approach to project management as well. Related to that is subject matter expertise. Again, sometimes with some policy elements, the policy is laid out, the subject matter is laid out, what they're looking for is execution. In other cases, they're looking for the expertise in order to make that policy come to life. And that's usually the case with ones related to education providers. They're looking for you to bring your course materials and your research to the table in order to execute on that policy. Um, and then when we get down to execution, most government organizations want some form of performance improvement. They definitely want delivery expertise and operational excellence because it's obviously, I think most people in government would agree it's a counter to sometimes what might be happening internally. They want to make sure that their policy gets implemented, so they're looking for the outsource passes to push things through and to make sure that they happen. So they're looking for project management expertise, and in the case of the example we gave before, so technical expertise to make sure that it gets delivered and rolled out. And then finally, for the larger ones, they're looking for scalability and reach. Now, not all of these things matter in all tenders, and when you get into pricing, it's important to understand and to analyze which are the things that they're going to be focusing on, so that that's where you can focus your pricing approach. So with that in mind, and I know we're coming up close to time, so I'll whiz through this quickly. Here are a few little tips around how to price when working with government, in particular with a focus on trying to build recurring revenue. My first tip would be price early and put pricing at the center. Not because it's all about money, but running a pricing model gives you the discipline of continuously analyzing the proposal that you're putting together and understanding the resources that you need and the approach of it. And iterating on that can help you uncover new elements for your opportunity, but also make sure that you keep focusing on the elements that we talked about on the previous slide that the government actually values. With that in mind, consider the value to the customer, not just your cost. So don't just do a cost plus model without thinking about whether it fits within their budget or is aligned to those value levers that we talked about on the previous slide. It's important to focus on the areas that they might value. So for example, if they really value your brand, maybe and something like the issuing of a certification, it might not come with much cost to you, but they may value it. So you could price that at a certain level because they value that certificate or that certification. So you might have a certification fee, for example. Maintain a healthy skepticism about volumes. This is probably the number one. They always talk about the total addressable market when putting these things out, and you may price thinking that you're going to get to that volume, but often if a piece of learning isn't required or a solution isn't required, you might not get to that volume. And so you have to be very careful about how you price if you're doing a participant-based pricing, which leads me to the next one. Where the volumes do seem risky, you're probably better off focusing on a cohort or more of a fixed based or annual sort of fixed pricing. Where you're sure that there is going to be some volume, you might be better off focusing on participant-based pricing because that gives you the opportunity for upside in the long term. You can generate more revenue over the term of the contract. Definitely look for when you're putting a bid together, if it's a multi-year agreement, make sure that you get the upside towards the end of it because that's when it's going to have the most margin and the most profit for you. You've put a lot of money in up front. But if you keep like a per participant fee, then in years 2 and 3, you tend to have something that's a bit more set and forget that's bringing in revenue without a significant amount of cost for you. Back to our partnering discussion, when you're applying margins, when partnering, be very careful. Everyone puts their own margins on things, and then if you put margins on your subcontractors' margins, you can start to price yourself out of the market. So you need to have a bit of a variable margin application and really focus on putting the higher margins on the higher value that the lead partner is delivering and making sure that you don't mark everything up to the point where you price yourself out of the market. That's often something I see, particularly with marketing, with partnering. You see all of the partners sort of jump in and put their bits in, and then you end up with a spreadsheet with a price in it without analyzing whether or not it's actually too high. And then finally, with government, you can never underestimate the amount of client management that will be required. There is always project management, there is documents that need to be filled out. There's always 10 times as many whips as you think there's going to be, and the project might go for longer than you expect as well. So make sure that you both build it in, but also build it in from a risk management perspective. So maybe say, look, we're assuming this project's going to go for 6 months. If it goes for only 6 months, more than 6 months, there's an extra fee involved. Definitely be very careful around that and figure out ways to build in risk management into your process. Good.
Brilliant. Thank you, Josh. So with that in mind, and conscious we are sort of right on time, we also wanted today just to take the opportunity to introduce the Guru Learning Partner Program, which we've, as of today, started to take the covers off. So really what we've designed with our partner program is resources ultimately to help you be more successful and win more opportunities and obviously build those lasting client relationships that you're seeking. So we've developed a channel partner toolkit, and we'll continue to evolve that and improve that over time as well with new resources as we produce those. But ultimately, we've got a curated set of resources that are available to our partners now, obviously to help expand your reach, but also help build some efficiency within one going after government bids, but obviously any sort of direct business development opportunities as well. So within that toolkit, we've got things like key market differentiation points, a range of different sort of model responses and different resources, and then also comparisons between different technology solutions out in the marketplace. Again, just to provide all that information sort of at your fingertips. So as you're starting to develop the bid and develop the response, not only can we be focusing on the value that perhaps a shared bid provides, but also around like how can we compete against other solutions in the marketplace. So ultimately, with our partner program, we're looking to build this into an ecosystem that really has a lot of very useful and very practical resources that people can use to help be successful on their own direct business to business and enterprise business development opportunities. So we're really excited to announce that. And obviously, today, as we follow up with this webinar, we'll provide you links where you can go and learn a bit more. But ultimately, the partner program page has just gone up to the Guru Learning website a short time ago. So for anybody that wants to check it out, you'll see the partner program available on gurulearning.com now. So with that in mind, firstly, thank you everyone for your time today. If there are any questions that you'd like Josh or myself to cover just before we wrap up for this afternoon, more than happy to take those now. And equally, if there are any after this session, feel free to reach out to either Josh or myself, and we'd be happy to take those offline as well. But if there are any questions that you'd like to pose to us now, happy to field those. If you could pop those into the chat. But otherwise, thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. It's been a real pleasure.